How do you sort out the so-called jargon from real-world practices that work? Do the members of your organization find some business or technology advice utterly confusing? Welcome to Real Talk with Sam Holcman. In this program, we set the record straight, and in terms that business people and technology people can understand. Now, here is your host, Sam Holcman.
Welcome to this edition of Real Talk. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Sam Holcman, and the topic for today's broadcast is Rethinking Cloud-First Strategy. As I begin this particular broadcast, please recognize I'm not against the cloud, not at all. As a matter of fact, we use it quite extensively in our work and our clients' work. But the purpose of the broadcast is rethinking this phrase, cloud-first strategy. And this is because after the initial push, essentially, to the public cloud environment, a number of things are happening. And basically, reality is setting in. And one of the big realities is cost. And then the other thing is actually, believe it or not, flexibility and agility. We suggest very strongly, that the goal should be the right workload in the right place rather than cloud first. And that requires an architected approach to where things should be. Where do you locate the things that you want to store? I once defined cloud computing as running your stuff on somebody else's computer. And people giggled about that at first, but that's what this is. It's running your stuff on somebody else's computer, and that really requires a bit of architecture rather than sometimes the desire to keep up with everybody else because you read lots of stuff on the internet that's there. So let's take a look at that for a moment. What that is generally called now, and I'm sure you've heard this phrase, is a hybrid environment. In other words, there isn't one answer. And in an incredible number of organizations, this has already become the approach. It's just that people possibly don't want to talk about it very much because it actually takes some architecture up front rather than just saying everything in the cloud, everything in the cloud, everything in the cloud, everything in the cloud. It's called thinking. And within that architectural thinking that we need, it's to look at what are the objectives, and of course underneath that, what's the volatility, the amount of storage required, for example, the transaction rates. It takes thinking rather than just saying cloud first. Also, a lot of organizations at first thought, well, we began with a hybrid environment. Some stuff in our data centers, some stuff in the cloud. A lot of people thought that that was going to be an interim approach as they approach putting everything in the cloud. Of course, now what's happening is people are recognizing, no, that's actually the state, the end state that is preferred both financially and flexibility and agility that you get from the hybrid environment. But again, it takes explicit representations to do that, and those explicit representations is what we refer to, once again, as architecture, to make sure that we understand all of that, as we, essentially move forward. Now, the other reason, unfortunately, is that the return on investment in this push to the cloud in a lot of organizations has actually resulted in a negative return on investment. The costs are just skyrocketing in organizations, and now people have to backtrack. In other words, removing things from the cloud back to the data center, which is very difficult because the pathways back aren't as obvious as possibly we would like them all to be. So we need to be careful. The other thing that people have found is that the cloud environment has gotten a little bit more complicated than first imagined. And that's because an incredible number of organizations, we're going to suggest, at least from our data, at least half of the organizations that we've worked with are using 2 or more cloud providers. So now you have to manage those things. So it's hybrid. You have your own data centers and you have cloud provider A and B. I'm not saying don't do that, but once again, it takes a little bit more management to be able to do that, and underlying that is a series of explicit representations called what? Architecture. So as we move forward, the concept of what we like to call an architected cloud environment is replacing the cloud first approach. It's not that we're going to throw the cloud away, but we're going to architect before we implement. We're going to architect before we implement. And this cloud architectured approach is going to enable the enterprises to optimize where it puts its information, stores its data, and does its processing. I hope this helps a little bit. Let's move into this architected cloud environment to provide real agility and cost effectiveness and cost optimization to our organizations. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for tuning in to Real Talk. Be sure to join your host, Sam Holcman, again for another edition of our program. We'll have more real topics of discussion then.